Challenge time!
Let's make a slide.
So this video is our entry to the Rockler Bent Wood challenge, which is run by the guys over at the Modern Maker podcast. The challenge is all about including some kind of wood bending technique into any project that you want to come up with. We've never done any type of wood bending before, but we're also not one to shy away from a challenge, so we thought, let's try and incorporate 3 different wood bending techniques into one project. For all the techniques we're doing, we're going to be using some old kitchen worktop for the forms. What you can see on screen now is the forms that we're using for our first technique, which is kerf bending the steps. So we've designed these 5 steps to have an 18mm radius in this 3/4 inch birch plywood. Now before we started, we've done loads of testing to make sure that we're going to get this perfectly right. So far what we found works best for us to achieve what we want is 11 cuts, and they're spaced a blade's width apart from each other, and we raised the blade just enough to leave 1.5 veneers on the outside. By doing that, we've avoided any cracking or kinks on the outside, and it also just gives it a really nice shape. So we're using our crosscut sled on our table saw to do all these cuts, and a couple of things we found that works really well to achieve really accurate kerf cuts is to make sure that you've got constant pressure across your board as you're pushing it through. If the depth of the kerf changes as it goes through the material, then you're more likely to get cracking or splitting. Another thing we found to be really useful is to give yourself some reference marks on the base of your crosscut sled. Once you've made your first cut, you slide the piece across to the reference cut, which gives you really accurate spacing.
Right, so that's all our kerfs cut. We're going to be using some slow cure epoxy to glue these steps together, and as it's going to be holding the weight of a toddler, we want to add some extra reinforcement. So we've gone back and added some plunge cuts across the curves using our track saw. We've also created...
We are creative.
Look at my creation. My God. We've also made some of these hardwood inserts, and these can be glued into place once the step is bent around the form. At the end, we can come back and flush trim these.
So you've just seen us glue up the first set of kerfs on each of the 5 steps. Now we did want to go ahead and glue both sets of kerfs up because we were worried if the mould was sitting horizontally on the table, the epoxy could potentially leak out. So we've left it 24 hours and now we're going to come back and glue the other half up. So we've decided to mix our epoxy with some sawdust, and hopefully what that's going to do is going to make the mixture a little bit less runny and hopefully just reduce the amount of cleanup we've got at the end. To also help contain the epoxy, we've made some little packing pieces wrapped in tape, and these are going to get clamped either side of the kerf. We've decided to tint our epoxy white using this pigment that we've bought, and that's because we're going to try and make a feature of the kerfs rather than try and hide them. So let's crack on and get the other side glued up.
Right, so now it's time to make the slide.
So before we crack on and get our formwork made, we need to decide what shape we want the slide to be.
I think it's called for some research.
Let's do it.
Right, so I think that we've got a shape that we like. Now we just need to crack on with making these forms.
So we're going to use some old kitchen worktops for these because they should be just about big enough for the size that we're after. So let's trace that line on and start cutting.
Okay, so that's the forms cut and sanded. We've actually made 2 sets of these, so when it comes to gluing up, it keeps the shape nice and consistent across the whole width of the slide. To ensure that the forms stay nice and parallel, and to make the whole glue up process a lot less stressful, we're going to use this scrap plywood to make some spacer blocks.
So we've done a couple of dry runs, and what we found is that we had some small gaps just in a couple of areas. So what we've done is we've added some extra clamping blocks, which is just going to allow us to put some extra pressure on. So the material we're going with for the slide is 4mm birch plywood. Now we've got 6 layers in total, which gives us around about 1 inch thickness. We found that we can achieve the curve that we're after with this thickness material, but if you had some thicker material, or if you wanted a slightly more extreme curve, you may need to do some horizontal kerf cuts just to allow a little bit more flexibility.
Okay, so you've just seen us make the sides to our slide. So once we're happy with one, we then trace this across onto another sheet of plywood and use a flush trim router bit to make an identical copy. So these are going to house the handles of the slide, which we're going to make using our third bending technique, steam bending.
So we've never done steam bending before, and we haven't really got a good setup in our workshop for it, but we found a really good video on YouTube which showed you how to do steam bending without any type of steam box or complicated equipment. We'll pop a link to that video down in the description below so you can check that out for yourselves, but we've grabbed ourselves a roll of polythene bag and an old wallpaper stripper, so let's see if we can make something work. We were using thin strips of ash for our steam bent handles, which meant we only really needed to leave them in the steamer for about 30 to 40 minutes. This made them pliable enough to be able to bend round our formwork and clamp overnight. Once they were dry, we unclamped them, added some glue and popped them back in the clamps overnight to dry.
So that's the major parts of our slide done. We've just got everything dry assembled in some clamps right now, and it seems to fit really well. So the last couple of things we've got left to do is to join the slide to the sides, and we're going to use dowels, and then we've got to trim the backs off the 5 steps we made earlier on.
But before we can do any of that, we've got to do our finishing and painting. But instead of literally making you sit there and watch paint dry, we figured we can fast forward a few days and you can see the end result.
Okay, so here's our slide. It looks a little bit different from when it was last in the workshop, so let's quickly run you through what we've done. So firstly, to finish off the steps, we painted the undersides white, and then we used a clear varnish on the top and the sides. We then trimmed these down and attached these to the sides using glue and screws. We filled any of these screw holes just to keep it a nice clean modern look and touched it up with spray paint. We also added some clear grip tape to the top of the steps just to make sure nobody slips off.
To finish off the slide itself, we used 2 coats of wipe-on poly, being sure to sand in between, before coming back and giving it a final coat of varnish. Then, to get it attached, we glued it to the sides as well as those support rails that sit underneath the slide that we made earlier. And to make it extra secure, we came back and doweled the whole thing into place. Lastly, we give it a few coats of wax just to make it extra slidey.
Now, end-grain plywood doesn't particularly paint very well, so to make sure we ended up with a really nice finish, we went back and used a standard wood filler to fill any gaps, and then we came back with a water and glue mixture just to seal all of the edges up. We wanted to go for this two-tone look on the slide, so we were really careful to mask everything up, and then we gave everything a couple of coats of paint. Lastly, we came back to the handles and gave them a coat of clear varnish.
There we go, that is our slide all finished and done.
We genuinely really enjoyed this build, and we're really looking forward to using some of the new techniques we've learned in future projects.
Good luck to all the other entrants, there's been some wicked projects being made, so be sure to check out the playlist.
If you enjoyed this video from us, then we've got loads of other videos on our channel which you might like. Go and check them out and tell us what you think.
And the one very last thing from us, we've just launched our Patreon, so if you want to support us even further, we'd be eternally grateful and love you forever. We'll pop a link in the description below.
Cheers!
Cheers!